Most people assume the problem with supermarket salmon is in the smokehouse. Liquid flavoring instead of real wood, brine baths instead of hand salting. And yes, we'll get to that. But the bigger con is happening much earlier, in the fish farm supplying fresh salmon to nearly every chilled aisle in the country. Synthetic colorants fed to fish so their flesh looks pink. Vague labels that tell you nothing about provenance or welfare. Added water that you pay for by the gram. Feed formulations that have quietly stripped out the very thing that makes salmon worth eating. 10 brands are getting it wrong, 2 are still getting it right. Let's go. 10. Asda Fresh Atlantic Salmon Fillets. Start with the most basic question you can ask about fresh salmon. What color would this fish be without human intervention? Wild salmon gets its pink flesh from eating krill and small crustaceans rich in natural carotenoids. Farmed salmon raised on the plant-heavy, cost-optimized feed typical of budget farming would be grey, unappetizingly, commercially unsellably grey. To fix this, synthetic astaxanthin or canthaxanthin is added to the feed pellets. The fillet you pull out of the chilled cabinet has that familiar orange-pink colour, not because of what the fish ate naturally, but because of a pigment additive chosen from a colour chart by the feed manufacturer. This is standard legal practice across commodity salmon farming, but it's telling you something about the overall quality of what the fish was raised on. Beyond the colour, Asda's Basics Fresh Salmon doesn't tell you much about where or how the fish was raised. The label says Atlantic salmon, but it doesn't name a specific farm, mention any welfare certification, or explain what the fish were fed. Without that information, shoppers can't tell what standards were followed during farming. In salmon farming, things like how many fish are kept in each sea pen, what they're fed, and how they're cared for can all affect the final product. For example, fish raised in more crowded conditions may be less active, which can influence how fat is stored in the flesh. Feed quality also plays a role in texture and flavor. When a product is positioned at a lower price point, farming and supply decisions are often made with cost efficiency in mind. That doesn't automatically mean poor quality, but it can help explain why some budget salmon fillets may feel softer, fattier, or less consistent when cooked. Tasted of absolutely nothing. Thought I'd cooked it wrong until I bought salmon from a proper fishmonger and realized what the difference actually was. 9. Morrison's Fresh Salmon Fillets. These present a very similar picture, but there's a specific issue with this range worth understanding in more depth. The question of omega-3 content and how farming practices affect it. Salmon is widely understood to be a rich source of omega-3 fatty acids. That reputation is real but conditional. It depends entirely on what the fish was fed. Omega-3s in salmon come from fish oil in the feed chain, which is expensive and has become increasingly scarce as global demand outstrips supply. In response, the aquaculture industry has progressively replaced fish oil with cheaper alternatives. Vegetable oils, soy protein, and other plant-based ingredients that contain no omega-3s at all, or contain the wrong type. The critical window is the final months before harvest. If fish oil is reintroduced, then the salmon can accumulate meaningful omega-3 levels. If cost pressure rules it out, the fillet on your plate may contain a fraction of what the packaging implies. Morrison's makes no specific claims about feed composition on its standard range, which means there's no commitment to any minimum standard of fish oil inclusion. Add to this the standard absence of stocking density information, no third-party welfare certification, and provenance that extends only to a broad regional label, and you have a product telling you the minimum legally required, rather than anything that would actually help you make an informed choice. Morrison's does have a better premium tier. This isn't it. One customer said, "Fine under a heavy sauce, I suppose, as a piece of salmon you actually want to taste." Not really. 8. Little Gianni's Fresh Salmon Fillets. Lidl's approach to fresh salmon is revealing in a specific way. Their deluxe own brand range makes real quality claims in many categories and often delivers on them. Their standard fresh salmon, however, occupies a different position, one where the branding is doing more work than the fish. The colour additive issue applies here just as it does across budget fresh salmon, but Lidl's product has an additional texture problem worth naming. Farmed salmon in high-density net pens has limited room to swim. Fish that don't swim don't develop lean muscle the way their wild counterparts do, and the result is a flesh composition that is noticeably fattier and less firm. This isn't inherently a problem. Some fat content is desirable in salmon, but when it's the consequence of overcrowding rather than natural feeding, the fat distributes unevenly. You get pockets of soft, greasy flesh alongside leaner sections, which creates an inconsistent eating experience. The other issue is that without any declared stocking density or welfare certification, there's no way of knowing how far down that scale of intensity the supplier sits. Budget retail price pressure pushes suppliers towards higher density, shorter grow-out periods, and cheaper feed. Lidl's price point on this product is competitive, and that competitiveness has to come from somewhere. This customer review said, "Some have been fine, some almost unpleasantly fatty. You don't know which you're getting until you cook it." 7. Tesco Fresh Atlantic Salmon Fillets. They earn a specific mention for one practice that sits apart from the general failings of budget salmon farming: added water. Check the ingredients on some variants of this range and you will find water listed explicitly. This is not residual moisture from storage or refrigeration. That doesn't appear on an ingredient list. This is water that has been deliberately introduced to the fillet, either by injection or by soaking, to increase its weight before it reaches the scales. You are paying for that water at salmon prices. When the fillet hits a hot pan and that absorbed water immediately steams off, what you're left with is noticeably smaller than what you put in. And that shrinkage is precisely the water you paid for. The practice is legal. It's also a clear signal about the priority order of the people who made this product. A quality-focused producer has no reason to add water to fresh fish. The only reason to do it is to increase the saleable weight at minimal cost. Combined with no declared provenance beyond Atlantic, synthetic colorant in the feed chain, and no welfare information, this is a product that has been optimized entirely around its price point rather than what ends up on your plate. This customer wished they had read the label before purchase, shrinks dramatically in the pan. Reading the label explained exactly why. 6. Young's Salmon Fillets. Young's has decades of brand authority in British fish built primarily on frozen convenience products. That authority is doing significant work in their salmon range, where the ingredient list is more complicated than fresh fish has any reason to be. Some Young's salmon products include phosphate-based additives, compounds that function as water retention agents, helping fish hold moisture during freezing, thawing, and extended storage. This matters for two reasons. First, phosphates add weight, and weight means you're paying more for additives and less for fish. Second, when phosphates are actively binding water in the fillet, the texture on the plate is not purely the texture of the fish, it's been altered by chemistry. The result is often a slightly rubbery, artificially firm quality that experienced salmon eaters find off-putting. Phosphates in fish products are permitted and common in industrial processing, but their presence is a marker of a product designed for supply chain convenience rather than eating quality. A fillet that has been properly handled from catch to counter doesn't need water retention additives to arrive looking presentable. The fact that it needs help tells you something about the journey it's been on. Beyond the additives, the provenance is vague. Welfare standards aren't declared, and the brand is leveraging trust built on fish fingers to sell you something that deserves more scrutiny than the name usually receives. It's a salmon-adjacent product, works fine in a fish cake. As something to eat on its own? Not really, remarked one dissatisfied shopper. 5. Co-op Irresistible Scottish Salmon. The Co-op occupies a specific position in British retail. They've built a genuine reputation around ethical sourcing, fair trade commitments, responsible farming, traceable supply chains. That positioning is part of why people choose them, and it creates a reasonable expectation that their premium fresh salmon range should meet a higher standard than average. What you get instead is a product where Scottish and Irresistible are doing all the heavy lifting on quality signals, while the specifics that would actually back those claims up are absent. No named farm or specific lock, no third-party welfare certifications such as RSPCA Assured or Label Rouge. No information about feed composition or stocking density. For a retailer that will tell you which farmers' cooperative grew their fair trade coffee beans. The sourcing story on fresh salmon stops at a country of origin and a premium-sounding brand name. This matters because Scotland has salmon farms operating across a very wide range of quality levels. A Hebridean farm running low-density pens with careful feed management produces a fundamentally different fish to a loch with crowded nets and cost-optimized feed. Scottish salmon tells you nothing about which of those you're getting. A retailer genuinely committed to sourcing transparency would make that distinction. The Co-op's silence on the specifics suggests the product isn't sitting at the quality end of Scottish salmon production. If they're proud of where it comes from, why won't they say exactly where that is? Asked a customer. 4. Sainsbury's Taste the Difference Scottish Salmon. Taste the Difference range is built on a proposition: Pay a little more, notice the difference. In fresh salmon, that proposition is not being delivered. The label goes as far as Scottish in terms of origin specificity, with no named farm, no loch, and no third-party welfare or quality certification visible on standard packaging. For context, producers who are genuinely proud of their salmon, who are farming at low density, feeding carefully, and producing a product worth distinguishing from the commodity market, want you to know exactly where it came from. Specificity is a mark of confidence. Vagueness is a mark of the opposite. The Taste the Difference premium also implies a meaningful departure from standard farming practice, but without any declared specification for stocking density, feed quality, or slaughter method, all of which affect flesh quality directly. There's no substantiated reason to believe the fish was raised differently to the standard Sainsbury's range. The premium is in the label design and the price tag. The underlying supply chain may be producing essentially the same fish. Independently certified Scottish salmon, farmed to a declared and audited standard, does exist and is available in UK retail. This isn't it. One reviewer said, "Nice enough, but I couldn't tell you what I was paying extra for. The label doesn't really explain itself." 3. Aldi Fresh Scottish Salmon Fillets. Aldi earns this position for a reason that goes beyond the standard criticisms. It's the way the labelling is structured to imply quality it makes no effort to substantiate. Scottish salmon is a designation with real cultural weight in British food. Scotland has a strong aquaculture tradition and some exceptional salmon producers. But the designation is geographic, not qualitative. It tells you where the fish was raised in the same way cheddar once told you where cheese was made, except that cheddar lost its geographical protection and became a generic style description. Scottish salmon risked becoming the same thing, a heritage association stripped of the standards that gave it meaning. At Aldi's price point, the economic pressures on the supply chain are significant and real. Those pressures push in a consistent direction. Higher stocking density to produce more fish per pen, faster grow-out periods that limit the time available for proper flesh development, and cheaper feed formulations that reduce fish oil content. None of this is declared on the label because none of it is required to be. The word Scottish is doing the quality work while the actual farming conditions remain invisible. The synthetic colorant issue also applies here. There is nothing on Aldi's fresh salmon packaging to suggest any departure from the standard practice of adding astaxanthin to feed to produce the pink flesh color. Without that, you have no way of knowing whether the color you're choosing from is the fish or the feed formulation. Grey and watery once it was cooked, not what Scottish salmon is supposed to be at all, said a disappointed customer. 2. Aldi Specially Selected Smoked Salmon. The first of our 2 smoked salmon entries, and it sits this high for one reason. This is Aldi's top tier. Specially selected is the range that is supposed to represent genuine quality. The products Aldi puts forward as a real alternative to premium competitors. In smoked salmon, it fails at the most fundamental level. This product uses smoke flavoring rather than being traditionally wood smoked, and that's an important difference to understand. Traditional smoking involves hanging or laying the salmon on racks and exposing it to smoke from burning wood, such as oak or beech, over many hours, sometimes longer. During that time, the smoke gradually flavors the fish and some moisture is lost, which can make the texture firmer and the flavor more concentrated. Smoke flavoring works differently. It's usually a liquid made by capturing and condensing real wood smoke, then applying it to the fish, either on the surface or as part of the curing process. This method is much faster and helps maintain a consistent flavor. Because the fish isn't slowly dried in a smokehouse, it typically retains more of its original moisture. Many food specialists and traditional producers consider wood smoking the higher quality method because the flavor develops slowly throughout the flesh, rather than being added more quickly during processing. The gradual drying can also improve texture, giving the salmon a denser, silkier feel. While both approaches are legal and commonly used, traditional smoking is often associated with greater depth of flavor and a more artisan approach to the production process. Beyond the smoking shortcut, this product is brine salted rather than hand dry salted, which means salt penetration is less even and the fish has again absorbed liquid weight. The ingredient list includes dextrose, a sugar used to help the fish take on color during what is not actually a smoking process, and sodium metabisulfite E223, a sulfite preservative that must be declared as a potential allergen. Its presence indicates a product engineered for shelf life rather than quality. A properly smoked, dry salted salmon doesn't need sulfite preservation. The smoking process itself provides natural preservation. For a product labelled as Aldi's best, this is a very long way from what smoked salmon should be. 1. Tesco Finest Scottish Smoked Salmon. Finest, the word that earns this the top spot, not because it's necessarily the worst product on this list in isolation, but because the gap between what the label asserts and what the ingredient list confirms is more egregious here than anywhere else. This is Tesco's premium range. It is priced and positioned to compete with specialist producers and deli counters, and it is not doing that. The product uses smoke flavoring. The implications of this, at this price point and under this label, are significant. A naturally smoked salmon from a quality producer will have 3 or 4 ingredients: salmon, salt, smoke, and sometimes a small amount of sugar used in dry curing. Tesco Finest has smoke flavoring, meaning no proper smoking has occurred. It has brine salting, meaning no skilled hand salting has taken place. It contains dextrose, added to assist a coloring and curing process that only needs assistance because the smoking is artificial. It contains potassium sorbate, a preservative whose job, extending shelf life, should be handled naturally by a proper smoking and salting process. And in some variants, water is listed explicitly as an ingredient, the same added water practice we saw in the fresh salmon basics range, here appearing in a product with Finest on the front. To be precise about what's happening, real smoked salmon loses water weight during smoking, becoming denser and more flavorful. This product has had water put back in to maintain weight. The consumer pays Finest prices for water, artificial smoke flavoring, a preservative, and a processing sugar, in a product that should require nothing except salmon, salt, and real smoke. The Tesco Finest range does genuine work in other categories. Here, the label is a statement of aspiration that the product has no intention of meeting. Bought it for a special occasion. Tasted like every other supermarket smoked salmon, which is entirely the problem when it's supposed to be the best they offer, commented a disgruntled Tesco shopper. Now the good news. 2 producers have refused to cut corners. Both are worth knowing about. 2 M&S Scottish salmon fillets. Most people assume that genuinely well-farmed fresh salmon is something you can only get from a specialist fishmonger. Marks & Spencer proves that isn't true, and they're worth calling out specifically because they occupy the same supermarket environment as every brand on the worst list, and have simply made different choices about what sits behind the label. M&S Scottish salmon fillets carry RSPCA assured certification. This is not a marketing phrase the brand applies to itself. It's a third-party welfare standard with actual audited requirements. Stocking density must stay below a defined threshold, meaning the fish have meaningfully more room to move than in commodity net pens. Feed composition is subject to standards. Slaughter methods are specified. An independent body checks that these conditions are being met, not just claimed. That stocking density difference has a direct and visible effect on the fish. Lower density means more active fish, and more active fish develop leaner, firmer, more consistently textured flesh. The uneven fat distribution and mushy texture that characterizes overcrowded farmed salmon, several entries on the worst list suffer from exactly this, is a consequence of the fish not having space to behave like fish. M&S's supply chain is structured to prevent it. The provenance is also specific rather than vague. M&S names its Scottish supply partners rather than hiding behind a broad regional label, which is itself a signal of confidence in the farming operation. Producers proud of their standards want you to know where the fish came from. The brands using Scottish or Atlantic as a catch-all are not in that position. The ingredient list is one item: salmon. No added water, no phosphates, no colorant declared as an additive, because the welfare and feed standards mean the flesh quality doesn't require chemical assistance to be presentable. I'd been buying supermarket salmon for years and assuming they were all roughly the same. The M&S one made me realize they're really not, reported a customer. 1. Moe Scottish salmon. Moe demonstrates something important. The problems with commodity salmon farming are not inevitable. They're the result of choices about stocking density, feed quality, and welfare standards. And a large commercial producer can make different choices if they commit to it. Moe controls the entire production chain from freshwater hatchery to the filleting and packing facility at Rosyth. That vertical integration matters because quality degradation in salmon supply chains often happens at handover points, between farmer and processor, between processor and retailer, where accountability diffuses. Moe's control of the full chain means there are no handover points to hide behind and no weak links to blame. Their Scottish salmon fillets recently won a Great Taste Award, assessed blind by around 500 expert judges among more than 14,000 products. No branding, no packaging, no margin for marketing to do the work that quality should do. The judges specifically commended the fillets for a clean aroma, oily richness, well-defined flakes, firm yet tender texture, and, critically, an absence of the fatty flabbiness that often marks out poorly farmed salmon. That last detail is the most telling. Fatty flabbiness in salmon is usually a direct consequence of overcrowded pens, limited movement, and poor feed quality. The fact that Moe's fish was specifically noted for not having it tells you something positive about how the fish were raised, not just how they were processed. For a product available in mainstream UK retail, this is a genuinely meaningful quality marker. You don't need to source specialist produce or visit an artisan supplier. You need to choose the producer that has made the right decisions about what happens before the fish reaches the counter. A relieved customer said, "There's actual flavour in the fish itself. After years of supermarket salmon that tastes of very little, that shouldn't feel like a revelation, but it does." For fresh salmon, the label tells you less than it should and more than most people read. Scottish is geography, not quality. Atlantic salmon is a species name, not a standard. Look for a named farm, a specific loch, or a third-party welfare certification, RSPCA, assured, label rouge or equivalent. If the label won't tell you where the fish came from or how it was raised, that silence is itself the answer. And check the ingredient list. Fresh salmon fillets should have one ingredient. If it has more, find out why. For smoked salmon, the test is simple. If you see smoke flavouring, the fish was probably never near a smokehouse. If you see added water, you're paying for moisture. If the ingredient list runs to more than 4 items, ask what each one is for. 2 producers are still doing it right. The others are selling you a convincing approximation and pricing it as though it's the real thing. You know who they are now. Choose accordingly.